My God, I'm not used to being clapped. It's great to see you guys tonight, it really is. My name is Lindsay Tuffin. I am the founder and editor of TasmanianTimes.com with the indispensable help and wisdom of James Dryborough. Where are you, James? There he is. And Bob Burton, and the input of dozens of writers, citizen journalists, contributors and commenters. It is a great joy to welcome you here tonight to the inaugural, and perhaps last, no, that's not terribly optimistic, to the inaugural Tasmanian Times lecture. Tasmanian Times began in October 2002 because of my strong sense, perhaps an arrogant sense, as a practicing journalist, that much of the truth of Tasmania was not being told, and that many lies were being retailed as the truth by our major media here. I saw Tasmanian Times in the tradition of dissenting Tasmanian journalism, drawing inspiration from the first great editor of the Sydney Morning Herald, John West, who was born in 1809. West earlier had a strong association with the Examiner, founded in 1842. He successfully used its columns as a vehicle of dissent to promote the abolition of the transportation of convicts to Van Diemen's Land. West wrote this in his History of Tasmania, published in 1852. Quote, "The newspapers of this hemisphere were long mere vehicles of government intelligence or expressions of the views and feelings of the ruling powers. Malice or humour in the early days expressed itself in what were called pipes, a ditty either taught by repetition or circulated on scraps of paper. The offences of official men were thus hitched into rhyme. Thus the fear of satire checked the haughtiness of power." What a wonderful quote. The fear of satire checked the haughtiness of power. In 2002, I felt the media here, the ABC, along with the newspapers, were once more, too much, the mere vehicles of government intelligence. It was time once more to play the pipes, no longer on scraps of paper, but bytes of data over the internet. Over the next 9 years, we broke and progressed many major stories, from the renovation of then Premier Paul Lennon's house by a Guns Limited subsidiary, to the seemingly inexplicable and scandalous decision by the state Labor government to award federal hotels a gaming monopoly in Tasmania, estimated to be worth $130 million for no charge. We have also run countless small stories, some of which has been to create a mosaic of the truth of what really goes on in our island, that I hope has in its small way and to some extent helped check the haughtiness of power. Today, Tasmanian Times has God knows how many readers. The stats, depending on which analysis is used, reveal somewhere between 20 and 50,000 unique users a month, 4 to 5 million hits a month, and all this on donations, a few splendid advertisers and voluntary effort. It is then a great joy to be here tonight introducing a man who has in his political life embodied a sense of independence and the courage to speak truth to power. Born on 8 November 1961 in Tamworth, New South Wales, Andrew Wilkie had a successful career as an army officer and then intelligence analyst until 2003, when he made national headlines over his courageous resignation from his position in the Office of National Assessments over concern that intelligence was being misrepresented for political purposes in making the case for Australia's contribution to the 2003 invasion of Iraq, all under the Howard government. He was a Greens candidate for both the federal division of Bennelong in the 2004 federal election and for the Senate in Tasmania at the 2007 federal election. In 2010, he ran as an independent candidate for the state seat of Denison at the Tasmanian state election, narrowly missing election. Later in the year, again as an independent candidate, he ran for the federal seat of Denison at the federal election. On that remarkable election night, the ABC's Anthony Green became so confused by a battle in Denison that was anything but two-party preferred that he at one point called the seat for Robert Menzies. Only Tasmanian Times snail expert and preeminent psephologist Dr. Kevin Bonham got it right, alerting TT readers 3 hours before the ABC woke up that a huge upset was on the cards in Denison. Andrew has been upsetting people, not least Clubs Australia, ever since, and thank God for that. Tonight he has very kindly agreed to speak to us on the very relevant subject, Has Politics Failed Us? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the member for Denison and the inaugural Tasmanian Times lecturer, Andrew Wilkie.
Lindsay, thank you very much for those very generous words. And thank you to Tassie Times for being the beacon of quality journalism that you continue to be in this state. And I'm sure that we would be much the poorer without Tassie Times and Lindsay Tuffin, so thank you. I was going to acknowledge the presence of Deputy Lord Mayor and Greens mayoral candidate Helen Burnett, but as I sat there and saw everyone coming in, I realised I think we have every candidate for every position in the Hobart City Council. There's some Clarence City Council, I think there's some Glenorchy City Council, and Bill Harvey, the Vice Mayoral Greens candidate. So please excuse me if I don't go beyond that in acknowledging everyone, other than to say I think about 7 out of 10 of the people who are here are council candidates. And I've got to also add, I feel like can you hear me okay? About like that? I feel like a bit of a fraud here tonight. A public speaking fraud in that I am in the presence of Richard Flanagan and Peter Hay, who are beautiful public speakers, and I can't hope to get even close to the way they speak. And I feel like an analyst fraud with Dr. Kevin Bonham here. If anybody should be teasing out what's going right or wrong in politics in Australia at the moment, I think Dr. Bonham would probably be doing a much better job than I. So I think what I'll bring to this session tonight is probably a more practical set of observations as a participant, as a practitioner in what are momentous political times in this country and in this state. And I'll have some views to share about state politics as well in due course. Dealing with the question of whether or not politics has failed us is obviously deeply subjective. At the federal level, for instance, a passionate Gillard supporter might be quite happy with the current situation, while a passionate Abbott supporter might be horrified with what's going on in Canberra. Moreover, the issue is obviously quite complex because there are different understandings of the meaning of the word politics. There's different levels of governance to focus on, national, state and local, and different objective measures of the effectiveness of that governance. But for the need of somewhere to start, I will start by saying that at the federal level at least, where I'm obviously active and most familiar, I feel that politics is working much better than critics are prepared to give it credit for. For a start, the Parliament in Canberra is genuinely representative. The 150 members of the House of Representatives were fairly elected, and the fact that no one party or coalition of parties has an outright majority is in fact neither here nor there. In fact, there was no great collapse in the vote of either of the major parties generally at the election. I think the only remarkable thing about what happened on the 21st of August last year was simply the closeness of the result. That was really the only remarkable thing. That so many people regard the hung parliament as being somehow illegitimate reflects, I think, their unfamiliarity with such a situation, or more often their continuing unhappiness with the fact that the coalition didn't win. And I'm quite sure that many people who are complaining about the hung parliament right now would not be complaining if the coalition had formed government, and we'd have a whole new group of people complaining about how the hung parliament isn't working. I suggest also that the federal parliament has proven to be remarkably stable. You'd recall that many pundits said it wouldn't last 3 months, but we're in our 14th month now, and there's only been a single incident that I can recall that brought a nervous hush to the chamber, and that was when Robert Oakeshott, seems inevitable, doesn't it, was when Robert Oakeshott miscalculated during a division which had the effect of signalling the Parliament had lost confidence in the Speaker. To his credit, Tony Abbott immediately rose and moved a motion of confidence in the Speaker, which remarkably was seconded by the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, and carried straight away with a unanimous vote. This put the whole earth back on its axis, and back to work we went. So for all of the grand manoeuvring and scheming and forces at work to bring down the government, bizarrely, the only point in time when the wheels came perilously close to falling off was a slight miscalculation by one crossbencher on a procedural vote, which effectively, the outcome of the vote effectively sent the signal that the Parliament had lost confidence in the Speaker, which of course would have been a terrible situation if someone hadn't immediately moved a motion of confidence, as Tony Abbott, to his credit, did. The federal parliament is also remarkably productive. In its first year, almost 200 pieces of legislation, that's bills and motions, have been passed. Not one government bill has been defeated, nor a single amendment to government legislation carried without the support of the government. This, by the way, is a much greater workload than the first year. In fact, it's almost double the workload of the first year of the Howard government back in 1996. Through all of this, the Green Adam Bant, and Independents Rob Oakeshott, Tony Windsor and myself have obviously provided just certainty of supply and certainty of confidence to the government. But beyond that straightforward certainty of supply and certainty of confidence, I think the four of us, sometimes aided and abetted by the Western Australian National Tony Crook, Independent Bob Catter, and even the Coalition, have also helped to make this a much richer parliament than usual. For instance, we've sometimes stopped bad policy. You'll recall there was much discussion about the sale of the Australian Stock Exchange to the Singaporeans, and the Treasurer, Wayne Swan, spoke in great detail about all of the reasons why the sale shouldn't go ahead. The reality was he knew that almost all, in fact I think all of the crossbenchers were opposed to it, and the government simply did not have the numbers. It was that simple, but it was much better explained in more elaborate ways by the Treasurer. At other times, I believe the crossbenchers in the hung parliament have improved policy. For example, the fact that the inner regional zone for the payment of youth allowance, the only reason that has been abolished, thereby making it actually fairer for students in inner regional areas, of which Hobart is, in fact the whole of the electorate is, the only reason that occurred was because the crossbenchers put the weights on the government and said, if you don't make that change, we'll support the opposition. And the government, concerned about having a major political loss on the floor, buckled and agreed to the change.